date older men in the first damn place because they usually have their ish together and know what they want. They been there, done that, got a t-shirt and a shot glass. But you still out here on your T.I. and Jay-Z. I don't want no old school rapping in the face nigga. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Operation Anteater, Part 10. When we left off, all of the families, plus members of the Five Families, had gathered at the Salvation Center of Dallas so that the newest children in the families could be blessed or dedicated to Christ. After service was over, the families gathered in the fellowship hall for an after-service, after-ceremony brunch. Catherine had manipulated things to ensure that Sincere would not be in attendance at the brunch to meet Angela's demands and keep him the hell away from Courtney. Something had transpired between Sincere, Courtney, and Natalia. You just gonna have to be patient if you want to know about it. I'm getting there. Anyway, the family was all gathered in the fellowship hall, and because Lyric had flown all the way to Dallas from Puerto Rico to serve as the soloist for her pastor's sermon, CT had insisted that she join in on the festivities. When LJ saw her walk in, he couldn't take his eyes off of her. If he thought she was stunning when he'd seen her at Bellamy's the first night when she was in a cocktail gown, singing her heart out on that stage, and afterwards when she was in a pair of Daisy Dukes and a tank top in the parking lot, he was even more captivating, dressed demurely for church. Why he was so pulled to the young lady, he just couldn't understand. He didn't know if it was her voice, her looks, or something about her spirit. Whatever it was, he was entirely too old for her. And while he was single and free to mingle, he was determined to resist the urge to allow himself to be sucked in. Just as he turned his attention away from Lyric, he saw Regina approaching. LJ turned his eyes towards the hills from whence cometh his help and said, "Lord, please." His prayers were quickly answered when Angela and Stephanie intercepted her. Then his eyes were drawn back to Lyric. When he looked away, she was standing talking to CT and Javier. But when he looked back, CT and Javier were gone, and they'd been replaced with Brutal Bosch. Bosch had his arm over her shoulder. He was whispering in her ear, and she was laughing. And LJ couldn't figure out for the life of him why that pissed him the hell off. He thought to himself, I should be glad to see that she already spoken for. That should make it easier for me to get this damn girl out of my head. I need to find me something or somebody to... Lord, forgive me. I just need a distraction. And just as he completed that thought, once again, his prayers were answered. One of Big Nate's beautiful daughters was approaching him. For the life of him, he couldn't remember her name. While he'd been people watching, he'd been watched. Almost in unison, Star and Courtney had approached Catherine, and both women had the same thing on their minds, LJ. As Catherine was answering Courtney's question about whether LJ was single, Star was approaching, asking, "Is there trouble in paradise? I thought him and the Tasmanian devil over there in the corner were married." Catherine said they've been divorced for 6 months. Star asked, "So I ain't got to worry about getting jumped again?" When Nigel's 5 illegitimate children were first introduced to the family, Star, the friskier of the 3 triplets, had been checking out all of the fine men in the room and eyeballing all of the ones that she learned were not related to her by blood or marriage. She and her sister Chantal ended up getting the brakes beat off of them at the welcome to the family gathering, and she did not want a repeat of that. And while she was not interested in getting burned, she was not afraid to play with fire either. And Catherine said, "Probably not, but you never know with Regina. The real question is, are you ready to be a stepmother? And for the record, that man's oldest child is only 8 years younger than you." Star said, "Oh no, a stepmother? Absolutely not. But I would absolutely like to ride him like Seabiscuit. That man fine." Catherine said, "Star, you are still on church grounds. What is wrong with you, girl? This is why Chantal asked me if I was bringing a fire extinguisher." Courtney laughed, saying, "A fire extinguisher? For what?" Catherine said, "To put this girl out when she goes up in flames. Matter of fact, take a couple steps back, because I don't want to be too close when God strikes you with lightning." Star and Courtney fell out laughing. Courtney said, "Well, unlike Star here, I'm old enough to drink. And I'm more than 10 years older than his oldest child, and I love kids. I'll be right back." And then Courtney sashayed over to LJ. Across the room, Angela and Stephanie did everything they could to convince Regina to stay put. And just like Star had mentioned, they had her hemmed up in a corner and were damn near holding her there. Angela said, "Regina, we are in the house of God. That man could look at and talk to whoever he wants to." When Courtney made her way over to LJ, he thought to himself, what's with all these young broads? What, they looking for a damn sugar daddy? But he was thankful that God had provided him with a distraction from the overly friendly interaction going on between Bosch and Lyric. LJ decided to humor her. Courtney said, How you doing? Your name is LJ, right? LJ said, it is, and you Big Nate's daughter, right? Courtney said, I am. My name is Courtney. I'm his oldest daughter. LJ chuckled and said, you can't be more than 23, 24. Courtney said, I'll be 27 next year. She failed to mention that she hadn't had her 26th birthday that year. LJ said, that's not much different, Shotty. I'm in my 40s. Courtney said, can't be older than 35. LJ said, flattery will get you everywhere. Courtney said, right now, I'm just trying to get to dinner. You got plans? I'm treating. LJ said, oh, really? I like a woman who extends the invite and picks up the tab. I can eat. Courtney said, good. I know this nice little Trinidadian restaurant where we can be comfortable and safe. LJ chuckled and said, I think we know the same restaurant. There were several restaurants in every city that the five families either owned or had employees inserted, where members of their families or high-ranking members of their organizations could have a meal, drinks, go on a date, and so on. And the Baptiste family had a Trinidadian restaurant in Dallas, the same one that Sincere and Natalia had gone to on their first date. When the conversation wrapped up, the two agreed to meet there for dinner. And just as Courtney walked away, Regina broke free from Angela and Stephanie. Now, while everyone was enjoying the festivities, that did not mean they didn't all have their heads on a swivel. Rennie and Stax were on the other side of the room conversing with Mom Joyce. And Rennie didn't miss Courtney approaching LJ or Regina boxing in the corner with Angela and Stephanie. So she certainly didn't miss Regina's approach. She said, excuse me, y'all, I'll be right back. Before she could walk off, her brand new fiance Stax wrapped her arm around her waist and whispered in her ear, you good, right here. Rennie said, she not about to stop my brother from getting some. I mean, from being able to start over. Stax said, and he's told you more than once that he can handle Regina. How about we say our goodbyes and go somewhere where I can handle you? Rennie said, oh, say less. While Stax was preventing Rennie from turning the baby dedication celebration into a heavyweight champion boxing match, Regina was saying to LJ, so what, now that you got rid of your old washed up starter wife, you figured you could swap me out and downgrade to somebody younger who's easier to control? LJ said, what you getting into tonight, Regina? Regina said, nothing. What you trying to do? LJ said, good. I'm gonna need you to take the kids home with you when you leave here. Regina said, nigga, what you having, a midlife crisis? LJ said, lower your voice and mind your business. Regina said, for what? Everybody in here just saw you flirting with an adolescent. She's too young for you. LJ said, I'll be sure to check her ID before I pin her legs over her head and put her through the mattress. And then he walked away. Regina was speechless. There were only a few things that were worse than losing the man you intended to spend forever with. Losing that man to someone younger, someone of a different race, or someone of a different gender. And no matter what the situation was, no woman wanted to hear her man, or the man she still saw as her man, describe himself putting another woman in what she knew was his favorite position. Completely stunned, Regina walked back over to Angela and Stephanie with her tail between her legs and said, well, I guess I won't be alone tonight after all. Confused, Angela said, what now? Regina said, because I'm a single mother. Before LJ left the fellowship hall, though, he headed over to Q and Big Wood, slapped his boys up and said, I'll see y'all tonight. Despite what he'd let Regina believe, the date that he'd arranged with Courtney was just his way of getting his feet wet. But he did not plan to take the full plunge. As a matter of fact, he, Q, and Big Wood had a date with Sincere. They were the Queen Mother's plans to keep Sincere busy that night. A few hours later, Big Nate was putting an envelope in the hands of Saint Montclair. Big Nate said, it's good to see you, young man. You don't look any worse for the wear. Saint said, it's good seeing you too. I'm a little confused about how it's possible that I am seeing you. Nothing about this entire situation is what I was expecting. Big Nate said, by now, you should know how the five families operate. Saint said, that's just it. I do, and I don't like it. Since I'm not in a position to change the way that the families do business, I think it's best that I get out of the business. Big Nate said, I think you should give yourself some time. Get back out into the world. Get reacquainted with your life, the people you love. There are gonna be so many other decisions for you to make, much more pressing ones. And you may very well find yourself in a position to be able to change the way that at least your family operates. Saint said, when you sit for months, knowing full well that while betrayal may have gotten you there, your own life choices paved the way for you to get there, you don't have nothing but time to think about the life you really want and how best to ensure that when you get out, you never ever go back. Big Nate said, I know a little something about that. When I was down, I was a lieutenant. I had a wife and a young family. I had thrown rocks at the penitentiary more times than I could count. And I was in that situation because I decided that I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I trusted the process. And when I got out, I wanted out. I was granted leave. And during that leave, I got a visitor. It was your father. He told me that with or without me, the world would keep spinning. And whether I stayed or went, me and my family would be taken care of. Business would continue, and somebody else would take my spot. Saint said, I don't care who takes my spot. Big Nate said, I didn't either. I was a young man. Your father was older than me. While he'd been in the business longer than I'd had boots on the ground. He and I had very different vantage points. We'd seen different things, and we'd seen those things differently. He was not in a position to change my mind. But what he said to me did. He told me that what makes our business work is having people who see things that they don't like, are bold enough to speak up, speak out, and be the change that they want to see. He told me that I was uniquely positioned to impact the way that situations like the one that I was in were handled going forward. And if I walked away, my life would change. But I'd be passing up an opportunity to change how the lives of those who would come up behind me would look without the changes that I could make. At that time, we were recruiting 15 and 16-year-olds, the brutal Bosches of the world, and they were losing their lives and their freedom at alarming rates. We were saving money because those young people didn't have families, wives, and children who we would be responsible for taking care of, and they didn't have mothers and fathers who would be asking questions. And then Big Wood fell in our laps. There was a vested interest in ensuring that he did not become collateral damage. It was one of the very first times that a new recruit, a soldier or a finisher, who came on board was intimately connected with the families. Business could not continue as usual. Change was needed, and I was the key to that change. Freedom is possible for you and employees like you, not because you are a member of this family by biology, but because employees like me chose to stay and be the change. Because we stopped treating 14 and 15-year-old boys like placentas. Saint said, like what? Big Nate said, placentas. They have one job. When their job is done, it's done. Think of the mother as the world around us, and the baby as whatever the end goal is for the 5 families. Saint said, nah, you lost me, OG. Big Nate said, you'll get it when you have your first child. Saint held up the envelope and asked, what's this? Big Nate said, it's a letter. I'll give you some privacy so you can read it. I don't know what's in it, but if there's anything you want to discuss when you're done reading it, I'll be here for a few more minutes. Saint sat down at the conference table and Big Nate stepped out of the room. A few minutes later, Saint signaled that he needed Big Nate to return. And when he did, Saint said, you and Miss Eugenia have raised 2 outstanding women. They both deserve to be loved the way that they've seen you love their mother. My life has a whole lot of moving parts right now, OG. I'm learning that there's no perfect time for anything. But I know that if I was a father, I would not think that this was the time for a man to come to me and try to have the kind of conversation that I think you and I need to have. Big Nate said, hold on, son. You are not in a place to be asking me for my daughter's hand. Saint said, I agree. Natalia is not the type of woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. Nate said, make this make sense. And Saint said, she's not the type. She is the woman that I want to spend the rest of my life with. But I'm gonna need help being the man she deserves. You think you can help me with that, OG? An hour later, help secured. Big Nate called Emmanuel Lopez. Meanwhile, at the Trinidadian restaurant, LJ and Courtney had been having the time of their lives. The date that started, for LJ at least, as a distraction mechanism, ended up being the breath of fresh air that he needed. It was probably the absolute best way that he could get himself back out there. Courtney had flirted, he had flirted, but there was no doubt in LJ's mind that the date would not end with him taking her back to his bed. For one, LJ had picked up on the fact that Courtney was just blowing smoke. He wasn't 100% sure why she had even approached him. And while Courtney was extremely mature for a 25-year-old, who would be 27 the next year, even if he was comfortable with dating a woman that young, She wasn't really his speed. Courtney had a great personality. She was absolutely hilarious. In another life, they could be good friends. But as romantic prospects went, if LJ was looking, he'd be looking for someone a whole lot more low-key. Not less outspoken, not less self-assured, but someone whose power was a little more understated. Someone who had a face that she showed the world and a face that she'd reserve only for him. And with Courtney, what you saw was what you got. There weren't really any layers to uncover. Like many 25-year-olds, she just hadn't lived enough life that wasn't her own doing to teach her the lessons that someone LJ's age had already learned. It wasn't that he was looking for someone who'd survived the kinds of trials and tribulations that he'd had. He just wasn't interested in being a romantic partner's substitute father and teaching a young woman what she didn't know. He had kids of his own and 3 were enough. By his estimation, the problem with dating younger women wasn't just about the lack of knowledge, it was about the lack of depth. For a woman to keep the interest of a man like LJ, she'd need to be more iceberg and a whole lot less tree. About 90% of an iceberg is under the water. An 100-foot tall iceberg will have a draught or depth below the surface of 700 to 900 feet. But even the tallest or oldest trees' roots exist or extend only about 3 feet under the soil. LJ was willing to make room for the fact that age alone was absolutely not a determinant of wisdom or depth. Because he'd been married to Regina. And at her big age, she'd proven that wisdom did not come with time. And her depth was only skin deep. So he decided that there would not be a second date. But it wouldn't be because Courtney was young. It would simply be because if he was looking, she just wouldn't be what he was looking for. And before he could figure out how exactly to address that, Courtney surprised him by saying, "Well, this was fun, LJ. I truly enjoyed your company. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. I've been on dates with plenty of older men. And they either trying to teach me something, or they trying to figure out the fastest way to get me back to their house so they could show me something. My daddy did a damn good job of doing the teaching. And while I probably wouldn't object to you doing the latter, and I could tell from how you carried yourself tonight that for you this was more like dinner with your favorite little sister. And while I definitely want to know what's up under them tailored threads, I can see from the gate that you way too settled for me. More of a good time, not a long time kind of girl. And you give a lazy Sunday evening set. Hike to the top of a mountain, throw a blanket out, and watch the sunset kind of man. LJ said, "That's one of my favorite pastimes. How'd you know?" And then Courtney turned to the waiter and said, "Check, please." And they both laughed. As LJ walked Courtney to the back door, he saw 2 familiar faces being seated by the hostess. He said, "Give me a minute." And Courtney watched while he walked over to the table where Lyric and Bosch were being seated. LJ said, "How y'all doing?" Bosch stood back up and said, "I'm good. What up?" The 2 men slapped up and Lyric said, "I'm well, LJ. It's nice to see you again." LJ said, "You have an absolutely beautiful voice." Lyric said, "Thank you." Reading the energy, Bosch said, "I take it you 2 already know one another, so no introductions are needed." LJ said, "We've met." Then he looked at Lyric and said, "Your energy is amazing." Confused, Lyric said, "I don't know what you mean." LJ said, "How do you sing all night at Bellamy's and get up in the morning and sing at 3 services at the Salvation Center of Puerto Rico? Hell, how you perform all night and then hop on a plane to Texas a few hours later and sing for the Lord?" Feeling judged, Lyric chuckled and said, "I guess that would be hard to do if I actually sung at Bellamy's on Saturday nights. But I don't. My boss knows that my service to the Lord comes first. And so does the only man whose opinion matters." And LJ assumed that Lyric was referring to Bosch. Lyric smirked and Bosch said, "You 2 need a minute?" In unison, LJ and Lyric said no. And LJ said, "I did not mean any offense. And I certainly didn't mean to interrupt your date." Bosch said, "We not on her." And before he could say date, Lyric interrupted saying, "It looks like your date has gotten tired of waiting." When LJ looked over his shoulder at the door, he saw that Courtney was gone. He looked at them and said, "Enjoy your night," and headed for the door. Bosch raised an eyebrow and Lyric said, "I try not to make it a habit of dissuading other people's assumptions. It's bad enough I corrected him about my singing. I get all the judgment I can stand from people who I knew growing up on the island. I don't need any from a man I don't even know." Bosch said, "I get it, but so you know, I cannot be your beard." Lyric said, "You got some nerve. You think I'm stupid? After all I've been through, I don't miss much. You was awfully handsy at brunch, but you couldn't keep your eyes off of a certain woman." I said, "Some women you walk away from and leave your heart there." But this ain't about me. I haven't known LJ long, but I don't think he was making assumptions or judgments about your character. He was gathering information, and as a nigga who specializes in information gathering, I can confidently say that men typically gather information about women when we have a personal interest in said woman. Go ahead and lay it on me. When Lyric finished telling Bosch about her few encounters with LJ, Bosch said, "Oh, so you feeling him, but you don't think he's feeling you." Lyric said, "I didn't say that. Now you making assumptions." Bosch said, "Come on now. You know my track record. I know enough about the inner workings of men and women that any assumption I make is better than anybody else's best fact. He was checking your temperature, and you're entirely too defensive to not be interested. It's okay to make yourself available to the possibility that a man is genuinely interested in you without an ulterior motive. It's not necessarily my place to tell you this, but I promise to help you put all the pieces of your life back together. LJ is not like the men that you've encountered over the last few years. He's one of the men who led the operation to take down the trafficking organization. He's the reason why you're..." And before he could finish, Lyric said, "Can we change the subject? I don't want to talk about this." Meanwhile, in the parking lot, LJ had walked out and found Courtney hemmed up and pinned to a vehicle, tangled up and tussling with the General Ezra. And before he could run to her defense, he heard Ezra say, "Stop playing with me. Enough is a damn enough. You wanted my attention, you got it, little caterpillar. I was trying to let you turn into a butterfly." And then Courtney said, "Unhand me, nigga." When Ezra let her go, she said, "That's where you got me effed up. I ain't never been no damn caterpillar. They ugly as hell. I'm something like a bumblebee. I mind my business, make my honey, and sting niggas when necessary. Your problem is you got it in your head that because I'm young, that automatically means I'm flighty, and I ain't never been that." And then LJ realized that Courtney and Ezra were an item, and she'd used him like he used her. But his ego wasn't even bruised. And since it didn't look like they was gonna come to blows, he decided to just sit back and enjoy the show. As the argument continued, Ezra eventually realized that LJ was standing there. When he looked up, LJ said, "My bad, OG. I didn't mean any disrespect. I ain't know." Ezra said, "You good, LJ. And I know you ain't know. Cause don't nobody supposed to know. How young out here trying to make a nigga jealous, that's all." Courtney said, "And I wouldn't need to do all of that if you wasn't out here trying to play games at your big age. I date older men in the first damn place because they usually have their ish together and know what they want. They been there, done that, got a t-shirt and a shot glass. But you still out here on your T.I. and Jay-Z. I don't want no old school rapping in the face ass nigga." And LJ and Ezra guffawed. Courtney said, "And that ain't funny. Besides, LJ don't care. He was just trying to make Javier's niece jealous." Hearing that, LJ quickly stopped laughing. He said, "Run that back." "Who?" Courtney said, "The girl in there with Bosch, Javier's niece. I saw you undressing her with your eyes back there at the fellowship hall. You could barely focus on what I was saying." LJ was floored by the revelation that Lyric was Javier's niece. But what he said was, "I am not interested in any other man's woman." Courtney said, "The jury is still out on me and Ezra. But Bosch ain't..." "Never mind." LJ said, "Bosch ain't what?" Recognizing just how pressed LJ was for information, Courtney said, "Yeah, nah, I'm good. Y'all not breaking bro code, and I'm not breaking girl code. You got questions? You need to ask her." Ezra said, "Get in the car." Courtney said, "No, I drove here." And then she walked off. Ezra and LJ just looked at one another, chuckled, and shook their heads. And as LJ walked to his car, the wheels started turning in his head. Javier had plenty of opportunities to tell LJ that Lyric was his niece, and he couldn't figure out for the life of him why he hadn't used them. His investigative mind was firing on all cylinders, though, and he started putting two and two together. Bosch had rescued someone close to the families from the clutches of the trafficking organization, and Javier was hell-bent on being the one to untie Noah Kirk and push him in that pig pen. He was gonna need more information. Not that he was interested or anything. His cell phone buzzed in his pocket for the 50th time. And when he pulled it out to see what he'd missed, I wish I could say that he was surprised to see about 12 text messages from Regina. Several cussing him out, several apologizing, and several attempting to remind him of what he was missing. LJ just shook his head, blocked Regina's phone number, and then called in a lifeline. When Angela answered the phone, LJ asked, "Shawty, what you got planned for the night?" When Angela said nothing, LJ said, "I need a favor." When he told her what he needed, Angela said, "This has to stop." LJ said, Who you telling? I gotta unblock her while she got my kids at least. But I can't have her blowing my phone up all night. Angela asked, wouldn't it be easier to just tell her what you doing tonight? LJ said, it ain't her business. And the more information I give her, the more information she's gonna think she entitled to. Angela said, I'm with you when you're right. I love my best friend, but her crazy is really about to make me crazy. LJ said, I'm sorry, and I promise not to put you in the middle again. But please, do not let her use you as her inside man. Angela agreed to help him one more time, and LJ unblocked Regina. As soon as he did, he got another text message. And that one said, I miss you. And it had a video attached. And when he opened it, he saw Regina playing with her kitty.
Oh, now what? Feel my presence, conversation, surface level. When you love yourself, your eyes got open, you see they been against you. When you not happy, it go unnoticed when they benefit. No surrender, no retreat. We gotta stand on business, don't let them trick you. They tend to miss you when you benefit.